was in, hang on, sorry, hasn't started. Start again. Jakkie Cilliers from the ISS is with us today. What does it stand for, ISS?
Institute for Security Studies.
Okay, and the last time we spoke was in August 2017 on your book, Fate of the Nation. Now, I remember it's actually a fantastic headline. I was looking at it before we came on air, and the headline said, December holds the key, December 2017. And indeed it did. Cyril Ramaphosa was a surprise winner of the presidential election conference of the ANC, and Ramaphosa occurred, and everybody was terribly excited. However, that's been dampened over recent times, and very much so in the past week. But just going back to your book, if you were to write it today, would you still have sketched those three scenarios? The nation divided, the bad one, Bafana Bafana muddling through, and then the Mandela magic?
I think generally so. The big mistake I made, the analysis in the book, Fate of the Nation, has held up very, very well. The largest error in retrospect was that I overestimated the potential of particularly the Democratic Alliance to maintain the trajectory that, that its previous leader had set it on. And opposition politics in South Africa has been quite a disappointment. But the basic theme that South Africa is heading for a significant change, firstly in Gauteng and with the national elections in 2024, holds, as does the main challenge that I sketched out, which is reform of the ANC. So I had a look again at the book recently and read through some of the chapters, and I'm quite happy that the framing that I provided still holds.
And that was very deeply researched. I recall your university in Denver, where you did the academic analysis and then applying it to the reality.
Yes, we use a forecasting platform known as the International Futures Forecasting Platform. So I converted the political scenarios into economic impacts. And we were at the time making some of the basic arguments that South Africa can do much better, but the idea of heading for 5.4 or whatever growth rates, which is what is in the National Development Plan, are just patently unrealistic. But that did require deep and fundamental reform to get there. Of course, at the time, COVID was not on the cards, but many of the self-inflicted challenges that we face on the country were clearly on the cards, particularly around corruption, the challenges within the ANC. At the time, I made the distinction between what I refer to as a traditionalist faction within the ANC and a reformist faction. At the time, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma was generally seen the traditionalist faction. And the main challenge, and it remains true today, is that for Ramaphosa to survive and for the ANC to flourish, the ANC needs deep and fundamental reform that not only deals with the corruption and the patronage, but modernizes the party from a rural traditionalist pathway, which is where Jacob Zuma took it, to a modern urban non-racial party. And that challenge remains inherent to the ANC today.
I know you're not in the country at the moment, but if you were sitting here in the middle of KwaZulu-Natal, say, and watching what occurred in the past week, would that have also aligned with your analysis going back 4 years now?
Yes, it does. South Africa has the largest inequality and unemployment globally. And there is only one thing that can change that over time, and that is more rapid economic growth and employment growth in the formal sector. We can grow our informal sector, and because South Africa, by comparative standards, has a much smaller informal sector than most countries at comparable rates of income and so on. But it is only employment growth in the formal sector that eventually reduces inequality. I actually just today released what we refer to as an ISS today on security sector reform, where I looked at the challenges that we face in police, intelligence and the military and the leadership thereof, and set out a host of issues that South Africa needs to engage with on managing the inevitable instability and protests that we will be faced with for a number of years to come.
But Jackie, this was not inevitable protest. They might be coming. This was clearly initiated by dark forces. And we know it from the interviews we were having with people at the time in KwaZulu-Natal, where my contact base is very deep. It's my home province. We see it from what the president has said. And even today, the Financial Times of London has come out with a very strong editorial, their main editorial of the day, which addresses this issue, which gets back to what you started the conversation with and what was spoken about in your book, the reformist grouping and the rural grouping of the ANC. One of the upsides of the book was a split in the ANC.
Yes.
Is that close now?
I think we're looking at a splintering of the ANC. The party is a shell of its former self. So even if Ace Magashule, who's now the leader of the RET faction, whichever, if he would decide he has got no real support base, I think we see the main challenge is that the ordinary voters in South Africa don't have an alternative. So the main argument, which I put forward in Fate of the Nation, that people are either staying away or grudgingly voting for the ANC, still holds to this day. To modernize the ANC would require a huge challenge. And this is now Ramaphosa's main challenge, because the ANC has become a rural traditionalist party under Jacob Zuma. And it will probably lose Gauteng in the 2024 national elections. Once the ANC loses Gauteng, it has lost South Africa's economic and population heartland, and its future is very clear. Alternatively, will the ANC then embark? It probably will still be the largest party in South Africa. Will it enter into a partnership with the EFF? Or into a partnership with the DA, or will, for example, the new parties that we are seeing being established by Herman Mashaba and others, will that provide a potential partnership for the ANC? Or will the opposition parties, Mashaba, DA, for example, be able to put together a governing coalition in Gauteng? 2024 is critical to South Africa's future, I think.
But this past week, where the tax-paying citizens of the country were abandoned, were told to effectively fend for themselves, where they were shown on television that the looters were unimpeded by any police action whatsoever. The police just stood and watched on. Does that not go deep into the South African psyche and perhaps wake up those who haven't been awake to the reality of how far the country has slidden?
Well, Ramaphosa was handed a report on the intelligence community. What is it, at the end of 2018, December, I think 2018, the Mufamadi report. But he has been focusing on, firstly, on investment, then on economic reform, and in the meanwhile, South Africa has been hit by a perfect storm, by COVID, and of course then the insurrection that we've seen. And those riots were instigated, but the rapidity with which they spread point to these underlying deep social challenges that we face in the country. And what I think the riots tell us is the importance for Ramaphosa not only to focus on economic reform, and there is some movement on that, but also to look at the intelligence, the police, and the National Defence Force, and to restructure and orientate them to the tasks at hand. The tasks at hand are support to the police, border security, and these kind of things. They are not conventional defence. They are not whichever other fanciful notions we have. And so I hope that that decision will also follow. But we face significant challenges in terms of a coordinated vision of what we would refer to as the security architecture of South Africa. Who does what? Because we're trying to create, for example, a border management agency with absolutely no purpose and no support within any of the other agencies in the broader security environment. And that, I think, was originally established beyond cadre and other deployment, so that the Guptas could lay their hands and control. It was, remember, it was the legislation was tabled originally under Malusi Gigaba. So there is really a need, I think, for Ramaphosa to really place some focus on getting a grip on what's happening in the security agencies, because we're going to have to manage the situation, even if we get economic growth going, as I think we all hope will happen into the future. And that's going to require quite an effort from South Africa.
A more pressing need, though, surely, is dealing with the instigators. Is
Yes,
this likely to cause the split in the ANC, which you have written about?
I think that the challenge that that people like Ace Magashule and others have is that they don't really have a support base. Even within the traditional areas of South Africa, I don't think so. That's why I refer to a splintering of ANC, a continued decline in support. But remember, government's also busy with additional social grants and so on, and they are clearly doing that also with an eye on local government elections and national elections. But these, I don't want to belittle that, because these are important issues for poor South Africans. So ANC support will continue to decline, but Ramaphosa, remember, is the single most popular politician in South Africa. And the opposition really, they're not getting their act together. But having said all that, I go back to what I said a few minutes ago. There are options for ousting the ANC in Gauteng, or at least making the ANC dependent on what is hopefully a pro-growth alliance to turn that important province around.
So you don't see a split in the ANC, but perhaps
No.
only a splintering. What do
Yeah.
you mean by a splintering?
I mean that so some traditional factions, some former homeland leaders may step away. So you may find the additional creation of particularly local parties. Like we've seen with a number of smaller parties that have come, which all have great benefits to the individuals concerned in terms of our proportional representation system. It complicates South Africa's management, I should say, going forward. But I don't see something like COPE or the EFF, or if you want to go back in history, the PAC, because I think, in a sense, there is no alternative center around which that can hold. It is much more local and regional parties that I think we are seeing.